Hello and welcome to episode 174 of the Trends Literature Series podcast. And I'm Neeta Nijan. I'm the founder of Trends. And as always, I'm thrilled to have you with us today as we explore the most powerful literary voices of our times. Today, we turn the spotlight on a book that's been called unsettlingly brilliant and startling in its emotional clarity. And I'm talking about Instruments of Torture. Let me show you the book. It's a short story collection, which I've really enjoyed reading. All the stories that Aparna has so lovingly put together. And it has been, I must say, has been making waves since HarperCollins put it all together last year. Was it last year, right, Aparna?
Yes, it was February 2024.
Aparna is no stranger to literary recognition. She's a postgraduate from King's College, London, my favorite city in the world. And this book has been featured on the Telegraph's page turners of 2024, Shonali's much coveted book club, and so much more. She's being talked about everywhere. It has also been, as I hear, on the Amazon India fiction bestseller list and has been reviewed extensively in a lot of very uh, reputed publications. So, a little bit about the book before Aparna takes over. In Instruments of Torture, Aparna delivers a series of sharp, unnerving stories that examine cruelty, silence, violence, and power, especially through the lens of gender and social dynamics. So, welcome, Aparna. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Neeta, and thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Aparna. You deserve it all and much more, I must say. And so let's really begin at the heart of it because we are here to discuss your book and tell us all about it. The very intriguing title. I mean, definitely it is a little provocative, arresting, and layered. But and what does this phrase mean to you? All about what you can talk about your book. Yeah.
Sure. So, Neeta, the idea for the book came to me when I had the privilege of seeing an actual physical moving exhibition of torture instruments, of medieval torture instruments. And I just could not get that imagery out of my head. The stark cruelty and the kind of lengths to which the human mind is capable of going in in its most brutal form, that immediately captivated me. And I started thinking that even though none of these instruments are used any longer, there are so many other ways in which we torture each other, whether it is knowingly or unknowingly. Or even if it is not a cage of somebody else's making, so many of us are in cages of our own making. And I thought I wanted to explore this further. I also am somebody who speaks very openly about mental health challenges, about learning disabilities, having been somebody who's lived with severe depression my entire life. I have major depressive disorder, I have anxiety disorder, I have CPTSD. So I've lived with therapy and medication my entire life. And I have seen the kind of stigmatization that happens with something like this. And it really appealed to me. And in fact, since I was a child, I was always told that I have a very dark soul because I always gravitated towards stories which were darker. So I do admit to having a love for the Gothic, a love for creating an environment which seems a lot darker than what is commonly perceived. But that's just again, that is a purely dramatic choice, and it's a purely aesthetic choice. But the heart, the crux of the matter is to be able to handle being different, and to try and think about what if society were to actually not look at these as differences, but to look at them as different ways of being. And also, can we just look at the different ways in which we damage each other, even unknowingly, and just to put a lens on that. So that's where Instruments of Torture comes from.
And that is where the title also comes from because each and every
Yeah.
chapter, as I noticed,
Of
does
course,
talk.
my husband has made it mandatory for me to say to everybody who asks me where the name comes from is that Instruments of Torture is named after the various ways in which I torture him daily. So just yes, that's my call out to my husband.
I must tell everyone that there's a trigger warning in the beginning of the book that you've mentioned. That book contains themes of mental illness, physical and emotional abuse, rape, child abuse, and suicide. So, how did you kind of, there are, I suppose, around 7, 8 chapters in the
Eight
book,
stories. Yes.
7, 8 stories in the book. So, how did you really shortlist? Because I'm sure there's so many of them. How did you really
There
check
were.
the
So in fact, my editor was a lot more generous than I was, because till the book went into print, I kept telling her, "Can we scrap one of the stories?" And I won't name which one, but I was like, "Can we scrap it?" Because I still don't think. And this is after being 7 edits into the book, and she was like, "No, it's fine." But when it came to shortlisting, these stories are all about people I personally know. These are characters who I've seen in my real life, in my day-to-day life. However, obviously, they are completely fictionalized and extreme versions of what I've seen. So whether it comes to a child with dwarfism, or somebody with man boobs, gynomastia, or whether it is somebody with depression who is denied their medication, or even somebody who's been eve teased, or whatever it is. These are all, or a child with MS, like multiple sclerosis and things like that. I've had these experiences within my own life, and this is where I've gone into my fictionalized kind of a brain and said, now this person is leading their life, but what if circumstances were more extenuating? What would the outcome be then? So obviously, the outcome in it never really leads to, it may not lead to suicide, it may not lead to abuse, it may not lead to rape, it may not. However, these things could happen, and for me, that is something that I want to bring onto the table instead of taking that off the table, which is why I decided in my head that I would extrapolate and make these stories about what if this were to happen to these characters who I know.
when you were writing these stories, I'm sure you would have had this thing in your mind that, they are dark. No doubt they are. But yes, all
Yes.
with, as you said, that some of them, the real life and everything that, you've seen the characters as well. Was there
Yeah.
any point that you had a doubt that perhaps that might not be published or things like it? Once you read the stories, you realize the kind of hard work that you've gone
Absolutely.
into, and it's very much readable. I mean, I could just finish it off in one go, and all the
Yeah.
stories had,
It's yeah.
as you've so nicely described them.
Thank you.
So did you have any doubt at some moment of time that perhaps
About being published?
yes, maybe it's a
Absolutely.
different genre altogether?
Absolutely. Because up until then, I'd only ever written poetry in different formats. So my
Yeah,
previous book, Circus Spoken Village Freaks,
yeah.
I'm very grateful that it did well. However, it was not like it had HarperCollins as a publisher, because I'm aware that poetry hardly, and especially if it's an unknown person, poetry will not really find any takers. So I was sitting on this manuscript. I had no idea, but I am one of those few people who was lucky enough to be approached by my editor. And she actually asked me, "Do you have something ready?" And I said, "Oh, yes, of course I do." And I owe her everything, because she's
We're
the one who
talking about
started me
Prerna
down
Hill,
on
right?
this.
Prerna?
Yes, Prerna Gill.
Yeah, you
Yes,
mentioned
yes.
her in the book I read. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So she's the one who started me down on that path of, putting my words into prose and actually giving a thought to editing and giving a thought to writing in a different format than poetry, and it's opened an entire world to me, because now the next book that I'm almost done with is actually a full length novel.
Okay.
So yeah, so it kind of opened my world up to prose. And I'd like to think that the reason Prerna, just because I don't want people to have unrealistic expectations, I think the reason Prerna also approached me was because I did have a substantial body of work within the poetry community. And Prerna also she's an amazing poet herself. Not saying that I'm amazing, I'm saying she's an amazing poet. And therefore, through that community, I think via is how she came towards me, because she knew I was already doing stories told in rhyme. So then the next logical step for me would be to say stories in prose. So that's how she found me. Um, but I do realize the immense privilege I've had with my publishing journey. Even when I started with poetry, I have zero technical knowledge within the field of poetry, and I am very, very grateful to say that I've been internationally published. I did win a poetry prize as well. So, and in fact, with Instruments of Torture, I did know it would find a publisher, because the first story in the book,
Yeah.
which is titled The Rack, was also shortlisted for a international fiction prize, for the Third Coast Fiction Prize. So
Yeah.
I did know that the story had some merit and would definitely require extensive editing, but I knew that kahin na kahin to, there will be somebody who will find it interesting.
Absolutely. And coming to RAC, which is definitely, as you just mentioned, won this Third Coast Fiction Prize, and it was shortlisted for that. Yes.
Mhm.
And that is the first story in your book, which
The
is
first one.
really engaging. Tell us a
Thank
little
you.
bit about the story, its structure, its genesis, and how did it really found its place in the collection? This is a little different story. I mean, you've taken various issues in the book. You're talking about
Yeah.
this child who
Yeah,
was
we're talking
adopted.
about the foster care system in India. We're talking about
Yeah.
how parents and children may not be the right fit for each other, and
Yes.
that's okay, but it does happen. We're also talking about children having suicide, thoughts of suicide.
Yeah.
Something which is very underreported and we don't talk about enough is the mental health of a child, of a minor. And children commit suicide at an alarming rate in India. And we'd like to give that blame specifically, oh, wo kota gaya tha and he could not perform well, so he committed suicide. What we don't see is how the child has been systematically failed by the entire superstructure that surrounds him. A child does not just one day take a decision to take their own life. It comes after years of almost micromanaging that child to reach that level of thinking that I have nothing left of value to contribute to this state of being. And that by itself is so startling to think that somebody could come to that.
Yes.
So I am a deep believer that we are led to the decisions we make by years and years of our experiences. It's not just a one off. And that's what I tried to show with the case of Raghu, was that
Yes.
his entire mental being is also, as being a person who lives with CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. I do know that a lot of my decisions today are taken keeping in mind trauma I may have faced 10 years ago. So, I know that I wanted to map Raghu's journey as being one that finally realizes that, you know what, this is not the bad alternative. uh, I will just be in a different place. And also coming from a place where I myself have been suicidal, I myself have had severe suicidal ideation. I know how one day you one day it becomes a possibility, and it's not something that a person who's going about their everyday life would consider. But one day you do think you're looking, and this has happened personally to me, is that I'm looking at an axe, a shovel kept in the garden, and I'm thinking, what if I were to run out there and impale myself on that shovel? That would be so freeing. That's the way I've looked at it in the past. So I was fascinated by the idea of how to put that into a juvenile perspective. Raghu may not have that capacity to think in a way of looking at that fawda and deciding I'm going to impale myself on that. But Raghu may manufacture an
Hmm.
invisible friend who
Yes.
leads him to that same kind of, you know, ending. So,
It's a very
yeah.
heart-touching story, and
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
when it's an ode to many Raghus that we might have in our cupboards.
I
And
would like to think so, that even if one person thinks that there's somebody in their family or somebody they know who may be facing these kind of issues, reach out and be humane to that person. That's all.
I
That's all
was
it takes.
I was really moved by the story of Raghu and how you've actually dealt with the story. How you kind of got deep into it. And, there have been so many people who've reviewed your book, and amongst them, Namita Gokhale, who does say that Aparna's dark brooding and unblinking prose carries tenderness in its brutality. And she's so right about it. She's summed it extremely well, I suppose. The right words.
Very kind, Nita. Thank you so much. I'm truly humbled by your words. You're very kind. Thank you.
As you go through the book, you realize that there's a strong thread of emotional repression and invisibilized violence most of the times,
Mhm. Yes,
especially in
yeah.
domestic or familiar settings. Was that a deliberate framework for the stories?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think after seven edit go throughs, I can easily say that everything in that book is planned. Although all errors and all everything that's wrong in the book rests purely with me, not with the editor or HarperCollins. But yes, it was very deliberate because I do believe that women are the most underrepresented, marginalized, and I'm speaking now specifically of our Indian context. Women's labor is mostly invisible labor. Neeta, you know, I know, as women who live in contemporary India, that a good middle class woman will hold down a job as much as her husband. However, she will also be making breakfast for her husband. She will be packing her dabba for her children's school. She'll be coming back at night and massaging her in law's feet. She'll be doing all of these things and not be apart from a Mother's Day, there will be zero acknowledgement for these things. And I've seen this up close, even when it comes to people who work with me. I've seen this. A good, hardworking woman who will come and cook in my home will also go home and cook for her husband, will also make sure that her children are not going to be cooks, so they're going to be they're going to good colleges, they're being educated, but she will put her back into it every single day. And yet at the end of the day, she's not the one who'll go get drunk and come home and create a scene. It'll be the husband who'll mostly do that. So even though it falls into gender tropes, I would still like to say that I do belong to that category of people who believes in me too, but not. I don't believe in not all men. I don't think we're India is in the category where we can say not all men, because really mostly in India a vast majority of men still play to these gender tropes, still perpetuate these gender tropes. So absolutely the invisible labor of women is a very very important part of the book, I'd like to think, and I'm glad if that comes across.
No, it does definitely. In all the stories, you one can see the connection. One can see why you've tried to put everything together. But what was the experience for you writing this book? Because it took a lot out of me as a reader when I was reading these stories. They're
Of
dark,
course.
but yes, that is the reality. I mean, that is how it
Yeah.
is happening
Yeah.
somewhere. It's not
Yeah.
a figment of imagination. So, what was the
No.
experience of assembling the collection like this? How much did it take out of you? Because,
It took a lot. It took a lot, especially the stories that are to deal with children, because I am the mother of an 11-year-old. And when I was writing this, my own son Noyon was the age of Raghu. He was the age of, yeah. So when I would write that, I remember when I wrote the Raghu story, I cried. After I realized that this is the way the story will end,
hmm,
I was beside myself. But I realized it had to be done. And I also welcome writing as an act of catharsis for me. It allows me to deal with my own trauma. It allows me to deal with every dirty emotion that I think I would. It's taboo. I don't want to talk about it. So even if, whether it is about the sexual components of the book, I speak about them very openly because again I believe that sexuality is so repressed in India. We face a lot of troubles because of that, and it is because we don't acknowledge those things so very openly. So for example, the story of the girl who is depressive and then who's denied her yellow pills.
hmm.
Now that girl is me. I've never been denied my pills, and I'm very grateful to have a wonderful husband. But I do think, what if this were to happen? And there have been times that I've gone off of my pills and I've seen the kind of reaction I've had. So it was extrapolation from there, because I know that I would inevitably get, suicidal. After 6 months, I would definitely be suicidal. So yeah, the writing of this was the imagining of my worst fears. But Neeta, as a person as well, I'm a warrior. So I anyway imagine worst case scenarios. In fact, just before getting on this call, I was having a conversation with my husband where he was saying, "You always think of the worst case scenarios." And I'm like, "Yeah, what do I do? I'm just a natural born warrior." Again, trauma response. I do realize it is a trauma response. And I would like to think that I work very actively with therapy to do that. But as a writer, I skeletonize my own fears to provide output. My art is actually an expression of who I am to that extent.
Very, very, very well portrayed in the book, definitely. And coming to the story of Pellery, Shona and Sumit, that book definitely moved me a lot. How you kind of, it was like a novel in a story, how you put through the entire thing in few words. But so I
And
would, as a reader, perhaps a future writer, would like to know about you. How did you do that? I mean, it had, maybe you can write a separate novel on that someday.
Shona and Amit's story.
I mean, what I
Yeah.
mean to say is that you try to put so many angles in that. So, would you like to talk a little bit without giving much away? I would like the readers of
Sure.
my channel to definitely buy your book and go through
Yes.
it and write reviews on Amazon. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm glad you picked up on Shona Amit's story because it's slightly different from the rest in that it relies more on magical realism. So as a genre, I've dabbled with, because Shona, because all of these things happening, and there's constantly, when he touches her, the response that happens is like a magical realism kind of a response. So in that moment where we're suspending our belief and going into this world, which is Shona's inner world being made manifest to Amit through the touch. I'm very, very fascinated by different senses and how they actually interact with each other. So I love the idea of tasting your feelings or touching your emotions or like a cross pollination of senses as a descriptor for your book. So in fact, I in my next book, it's a very sensory book. The book that I'm writing, it has a lot of very, very sensory coded movement. So in the same way with Shona and Amit, it was a very sensory book, also because of their age. It felt very vulnerable just because they're so young, and then the whole, um, and it's a genre that I absolutely love, where the not the paranormal, but where the magic kind of collides with what is real, and you're left wondering what was real and what was imagined. What did he sense and what did he really see? What is objective and what is subjective? So I love playing with that boundary, and that is something I'm going to continue to do in my work. So that's where Shona and Amit came from.
Fantastic. Again, another very, very engaging story it was. And yeah, definitely I expected to write something even longer on that, carry it forward. Your language is quite sharp and lyrical as I read the
Thank
book.
you. Thank you.
But how did you really find a balance between the actually theme of the book, which is thematic brutality at times, right? And
Correct.
and the fact that there was a aesthetic beauty in your writing. So how did you really balance between that? Because you are what you are, you write so beautifully, and then you have to
Yeah.
deal with a subject which is a
So
little.
there are two ways of looking at this. One way was the purely weighted way, in which my editor was the best prerna because she made me knock out a lot of. I tend to be very superfluous when I write. I tend to repeat and I'll tend to bluster and be very overtly blousy. She was very good with toning and paring that down. In fact, hopefully in my next book it'll be starker. I'm hoping it'll be starker and it'll cut through the bullshit in a way to get to it. However, I do see brutality as having beauty. Inherently, I see a beauty in pain. I see a beauty in the ugly. I see a beauty in death. I see a beauty in what is taboo. And I think that comes through in the book. I think that's about it. Is
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That explains it quite well. Some of your stories feel quite mythic, and some are really brutally contemporary too, right? So how did
Yeah.
you also deal with that? Because setting the setting, and then while dealing with the emotionally core subject, how did you kind of also draw balance there?
So I think a lot of my settings, mostly all of my settings, come from my own space in place and time. So I come from a tier 2 city of India. I come from Nagpur. So
Okay.
that's where I grew up. I haven't lived there as an adult because I moved away to study. And then after that, I lived in Mumbai. I lived in Bombay for 10 years, and now I live in a big city as well. But my where my memories are frozen is life for a person who doesn't fit in a tier 2 city in India. And I think most of my stories are grouted around that. So I think there are some which have more of a rural setting. And for me, those are the stories I've connected to the least.
Okay. See?
And those, yeah. So for me, a story which has an urban setting, whether it's Shona's story or whether it's Raghu's story or whether it is the story of Henry and Jose, or any of these stories which are an urban setting, but not a tier A urban setting, but a small town India setting. I think most of my stories have that. The mythic element comes in for the simple reason that I like to inject the magic realism into it. So even whether it is describing a this grotto area in Henry and Jose's story, which is just basically a park on a hillside. But I would like to inject it with this sense of you're going into a different dimension, a different realm, which is where I'd like to think the mythic quality comes into it. But mostly these are stories very much grounded in India, very much something that I've lived through at some point in some way or the other, known about, so that I can make sure that I'm not co-opting somebody else's story.
And
So
it's another read altogether. As I talk to you, I realize that it's not only the stories, it's also the fact, the way, and the why you've written those stories. I wish someday you come with a secondary book explaining those stories. How did they come about? Because there's a story within a story. I find it even more
wow.
fascinating.
Thank you. I am so flattered. Thank you so much.
And, okay, from reader's point of view, some stories really move me a lot. But from a writer's point of view, I mean, what was the story which was most difficult to write for you?
Raghu.
Because, yeah, I
Raghu.
thought you would say that.
And Raghu and yeah, Raghu. For sure. Because again, what pushes a child to that level? Yeah. Anything to do with the children is always so Henry and Jose was very difficult.
Yes.
The one which has the two siblings, which is
Hmm.
Himmat and I'm forgetting the sibling's name. I'm so into my next book right now. I have those characters in my head as well. But the story of Himmat as well was something that was very difficult to write,
And,
especially because I know somebody like that.
and even I would say Spanish Bat, when you mentioned about Purnima, how it finally
Really?
comes
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
It looks like a normal story in the beginning that, okay, she's
yeah,
fascinated.
yeah, yeah,
And suddenly at the end, you give a different twist altogether that, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So that was interesting as well. So I suppose all the stories have a different tale too. So any story which left a mark on you, I mean, fine, yeah, which when
yeah.
you read back, you would have read.
Definitely. That I would have read. Mostly, can I tell you, Neeta, I'm one of those people where I read my own work, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? This is so badly written. I'm not criticizing the story per se because I know the stories are universal and decent, but the writing, I constantly am saying, what am I thinking? Who am I? This thing, and I hate what I write. After a few years, when I go back to it, there is very little that I read that I think does not require extensive revision, extensive rework, rewriting entirely. So, but if you ask me what really lives in my heart, I would definitely say that the stories with the children live with me always.
Yeah.
Always. So whether it is Raghu, whether it is Henry,
Henry.
and Himmat, these three characters are very close to my heart for sure.
And now that the book has really found a wide and very appreciative readership and critical success, I would say. How are you feeling about the instrument of torture? how it is being reviewed. So, how does it move you, and any reader's reaction that you would like to really discuss that stayed with you?
I'm very grateful for anybody who takes the time to read this work. And I am constantly aware of how privileged I am to be in this position. I know of so many writers who just have not had the opportunity to have their work read, or time and space and life has not conspired to give them the opportunity I have. So I realize the privilege I have, and that is what I remind myself of every day. To be able to write, to be able to scribe is in itself an act of privilege. And I don't take that lightly. I take it with utmost, it is my devotion. It is for me, it is my form of prayer. Um, but when it comes to instruments of torture, as in what do I feel about it? I feel it could have been better written for sure. I'm very grateful at how forgiving uh, reviewers are. I'm very grateful for how glowing they've been. You are, everyone has been. I'm very, very grateful for that. At the same time, sorry, what was the second part of the question? Was
Any special reaction that stayed with you?
yes.
Yeah.
What has mattered to me the most is when people have written to me, not the publications, but when any person has gotten in touch with me on Instagram and said, we read this and it really affected us and it made us realize I have had an issue like this and I've not been able to pay attention to it, or I need to take care of it. Or even there was this gentleman who got in touch with me who belonged to, they were they were a dom or they were a sub or something like that, and they said that when you have a lifestyle which is left of center and is considered to be taboo, then you face a lot of stigma. And thank you so much that you didn't stigmatize it in your book. And that meant a lot to me. There have been a lot of very young readers who've gotten in touch with me and said, thank you so much for talking about, say, depression, or talking about, just women, or any one of the issues. And it has really helped us come to terms with something we are facing, or it has helped to kind of help us see things in a different way. And for me, that is fantastic. Having said that, I'll be a liar if I say that the reviews don't matter. The reviews matter a lot. The sales matter a lot. At the end of the day, if you if you have to be published by somebody like HarperCollins, you have to be able to sell that many books for them to justify publishing you. And all of that takes work on their part, and therefore my part as well. It's my end of the bargain that I have to keep up. So definitely the reviews matter, and I am extremely grateful at each and every person who's reviewed it. It's,
Lovely.
yeah.
Lovely. Aparna, it's been such an engaging conversation with you. I mean, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us such, I would say, thoughtful insight into instruments of torture. It's a collection that doesn't really easily leave you. It lodges into your consciousness and challenges about how you think. And to our listeners, if you've not read or picked up Instruments of Torture yet, I really, really urge you to do so, and definitely read it, write a review. I'm sure that'll really make Aparna so happy. And thank you, Kavya from Kamaya, to put me through to Aparna. It's been such a pleasure talking to Aparna. So, any last words on the book that you would like to leave us with?
I would just like to say thank you so much, Neeta, for allowing me on your forum. I'm very, very grateful. I'm extremely privileged and I'm humbled by your very kind words and how beautifully you conducted this discussion. And yeah, thank you, everyone who's read. And if you're considering reading it, yes, please, that would be awesome. I would really, really appreciate you. Awesome.
Lovely, lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, thank you everyone for joining us today, and do subscribe to our channel so more and more people can watch this wonderful interview that we've had today, and with such a wonderful person, Aparna Sanyal. And hope to see you soon, Aparna.